The Orkney Islands is an archipelago off the northern coast of Great Britain and is situated between modern-day Scotland and Norway. Orkney was forcibly annexed by Norway in 875 AD and was settled by the Norse. Orkney was then re-annexed by the Scottish Crown in 1472 and remains a part of Scotland to this day. These ancient islands have been habitated by humans for over 8,500 years and have a long and colorful history. This history has been influenced by both the Celts and the Norse, which has resulted in its own unique Orcadian myths and folklore. One monster that arises from this mythology is the Nuckelavee, an abomination whose name means devil of the sea. With its terrifying appearance and animosity towards humans, the Nuckelavee was greatly feared to the point that it was considered unsafe to mention the monster by name for fear of attracting its attention. Now let's ignore those warnings and call this devil from the deep on this episode of Snipe Hunt.
Yeah,
hey, that was good.
You did really good.
Yeah, that was really good.
You did really good.
Like
Except you added 1,000 years to the AD, but it's okay.
Oh, did I say?
Yeah, you said 1875 AD.
Oh, it's fine.
But I don't think anybody gives a shit.
I'll edit out the teen.
Okay, that'd be great.
Can you do that?
Yeah. It'll be difficult, but I can do it.
I messed up on the second sentence and you waited for me to finish the whole thing?
Yes.
Were
You were
you
doing
afraid
good.
I was going to say
you were
archipelago?
Archipelago. Archipelago. Wake me up before you go. Alright, I guess it's my turn. Welcome back, listeners. You're listening to Snipe Hunt Frightening Folklore. I'm Darren Young.
And I'm Gary Clevenstein.
This topic, like the last one, was suggested by my mom, Jamie Abbott, and I was going to have her as a guest on this episode, but unfortunately she couldn't make it to the recording. But we still do have a guest. I would like to introduce my girlfriend, Susan. Thanks for being here, Susan.
My girlfriend, Susan, too.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
You're welcome.
So, thank you for coming on.
Yeah.
Okay. Welcome to the show.
Yeah,
happy
you're
to
welcome.
How's it feel to be on the ground floor of our podcast that's going to skyrocket
Someday.
us into success?
I feel nervous and nerdy.
Well,
Good.
perfect. If I were to pick two words to describe the show, those would be those words.
You're welcome.
Those would be those words. That's a real sentence, right?
Yep.
Okay. Moving on. So, I usually heard, most of the topics we discussed on the show, I've heard about before. This is actually, I've never heard of before. As I mentioned before, my mom, Jamie Abbott, recommended this episode, so I was like, I don't know what this is. But immediately upon researching it, I was like, oh, well then, that's interesting. All right, so let's move on to the description of this monster. Gary, if you'd like to start us out.
All right. According to this excerpt from Wikipedia.com, the Nuckelavee has a man's torso attached to a horse's back as if it were a rider. The male torso has no legs, but its arms can reach the ground from its position on top of the equine body, the legs of which have fin-like appendages. The torso has a large head that rolls back and forth. The monster described by Thomas. Yeah. Thomas. All right.
Blood the blood.
All right. The monster described has two heads. The equine head has an enormous gaping mouth that exudes a smelly toxic vapor, and a single giant eye like a burning red flame. A particularly gruesome detail is that the Nuckelavee has no skin. Black blood courses through yellow veins, and the pale sinews and powerful muscles are visible as a pulsating mass.
So, I highly recommend just looking up an image of the creature to get a better thing, because it's kind of like a mishmash of a whole bunch of different things, so it's easier to see it by itself. But basically, it's like a horse, but with like the torso of a person out of its back, like a centaur, but it's like in the middle of the back, and it still has the horse's head. And it's skinless, so similar to a centaur, but like a centaur of your worst nightmare.
What's a minotaur? Isn't there a minotaur too?
Yeah, that's the man with the bull's head, though.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was originally actually going to be what episode 2 of this podcast is going to be about, but I couldn't figure out a way to make it fun.
I honestly didn't even know there was a one with a horse head and a bull
No,
head.
the centaur is the one with the horse's body with the torso coming out where the head
That's
should
right.
be.
That's a human.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah.
I was thinking of horse head.
Like BoJack Horseman.
He has a human body with a horse head. That's funny. We can't talk about Orkney folklore without talking about Walter Traill Dennison. He was an Orkney native that lived in the 17th century and was a folklorist who penned down many of the legends on the islands, including the Nuckelavee. He compiled the oral folk stories from locals and published them in 1880 under the title The Orcadian Sketchbook. Although he's accurately recorded the details of these legends, he would often romanticize and transform them into his own style of storytelling.
The following is an allegedly true account of an encounter with Nuckelavee as told by Walter Traill Dennison. Thomas, like his namesake, Tam O'Shanter, was out late one night. It was, though moonless, a fine starlit night. Thomas' road lay close by the seashore, and as he entered a part of the road that was hemmed in on one side by the sea and on the other by a deep freshwater loch, he saw some huge object in front of and moving towards him. What was he to do? He was sure it was no earthly thing that was steadily coming towards him. He could go not to either side, and to turn his back to the evil thing he had heard was the most dangerous position of all. So Thomas said to himself, "The Lord be about me, and take care of me, as I am out on no evil intent this night." Thomas was always regarded as rough and foolhardy. Anyway, he determined, as the best of two evils, to face the foe, and so walked resolutely yet slowly toward. He soon discovered to his horror that the gruesome creature approaching him was no other than the dreaded Nuckelavee, the most cruel and malignant of all uncanny beings that trouble mankind. The lower part of this terrible monster, as seen by Thomas, was like a great horse, with flappers like fins about his legs, with a mouth as wide as a whale's, from which came breath like steam from a brewing kettle. He had but one eye, and that was red as fire. On him sat, or rather seemed to grow from his back, a huge man with no legs, and arms that reached nearly to the ground. His head was as big as a clue of Simmons, and his huge head kept rolling from one shoulder to the other as if it meant to tumble off. But what to Thomas appeared most horrible of all was that the monster was skinless, this utter want of skin adding much to the terrific appearance of this creature's naked body. The whole surface of it showing only red, raw flesh in which Thomas saw blood, black as tar, running through yellow veins, and great white sinews, thick as horse tethers, twisting, stretching, and contracting as the monster moved. Thomas went slowly on in mortal terror, his hair on end, a cold sensation like a film of ice between his scalp and skull, and a cold sweat bursting from every pore. But he knew it was useless to flee, and he said if he had to die, he would rather see who killed him than die with his back to the foe. In all his terror, Thomas remembered what he had heard of Nuckelavee's dislike of fresh water, and therefore took that side of the road nearest to the loch. The awful moment came when the lower head of the monster got abreast of Tammy. The mouth of the monster yawned like a bottomless pit. Tammy found its hot breath like fire on his face. The long arms were stretched out to seize the unhappy man. To avoid, if possible, the monster's clutch, Tammy swerved as near as he could to the loch. In doing so, one of his feet went into the loch, splashing up some water on the foreleg of the monster, whereat the horse gave a snort like thunder and shied over to the side of the road, and Tammy felt the wind of Nuckelavee's clutches as he narrowly escaped the monster's grip. Tammy saw his opportunity and ran with all his might. In sore need had he to run, for Nuckelavee had turned and was galloping after him, and bellowing with a sound like the roaring of the sea. In front of Tammy lay a rivulet through which the surplus water of the loch found its way to the sea, and Tammy knew if he could only cross the running water he was safe, so he strained every nerve. As he reached near the bank, another clutch was made at him by the long arms. Tammy made a desperate spring and reached the other side, leaving his bonnet in the monster's clutches. Nuckelavee gave a wild, unearthly yell of disappointed rage as Tammy fell senseless on the safe side of the water.
All right, so this is definitely just not like some of the other ones we have where it's just like a story of an encounter. This obviously has some It's very colorful storytelling language. So, but as we talked about Walter Trail Dennison taking encounters like these, or at least the folklore, and then when he printed out his book, he made his own kind of writing into it. So it's very theatrical. It's a great story that embodies the terror felt by the people of Orkney from the Nuckelavee.
I caught myself when when Susan was reading it. I was wanting to, a little small movie in my head.
Yeah,
I think it would have been good. It would have been good.
See, that's the best kind of storytelling is when it puts a picture in your mind,
right,
of what it is, even down to the description. It was really good. Definitely a story, more of an encounter, but it's a good story.
It made me think of the Headless Horseman and how Ichabod Crane was just, trotting down the road with his little pony and then all of a sudden sees something scary.
Well, see, it's great that you mentioned that because actually we're going to talk more about the Headless Horseman down the road. So look at you. You haven't even read the whole script, but but yeah, a little clap, small clap.
Can we insert some applause noise there?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I need to do. I need to put a laugh track in this.
You do.
Oh,
That way, whenever we make a terrible joke.
Yeah.
I would not listen. I hate laugh tracks.
Really?
Oh, they're the worst. It's like, stop it.
Even
I'm not
with us.
laughing.
Isn't like your favorite show, Friends?
You're the laugh track.
I know. But he just told me earlier that my laugh needs to be edited, so
It does.
I refuse to laugh now.
All right, so something I found interesting was that I read this throughout here, which is demonstrated throughout my research. I read this throughout my research, and it's demonstrating the story that the Nuckelavee can't cross fresh flowing water.
Is it only flowing water or was it just fresh water?
It's only flowing water. I mean, it is more of a creature of the
Oh.
sea, like it lives in the ocean, but it was during my research, it was very specific to has to be flowing.
Oh, because
It
I was
has
like,
to be
you can just
fresh.
carry a bottle of water around with you. I won't name off any names because we're not sponsored, but Dasani, you can just carry that in your pocket and then you see the Nuckelavee and just
Kind of like a priest with holy water.
yeah. Or like, when you go to Alaska, you carry around a little bear bell with you because the bears don't want to see you and you don't really want to see them on a trail. So, when you're up where the Nuckelavee is, just carry around a bottle of water.
Well, I don't think they had Dasani back in hashtag not sponsored.
Yeah.
I don't think they had Dasani back in Tomas's
I don't
day.
think they had plastic bottles.
Hashtag please sponsor.
Please.
Yeah.
Oh, God. But so I thought it was interesting that it has like this arbitrary rule or weakness that doesn't really, there's like no logic applied to it. But then again, this is folklore, so we can't really apply logic
Well,
to it.
he's a creature of the sea, and if you think about it, like, you wouldn't take Nemo and just, like, throw him in a pond because he would die.
Well, he can come up on land.
Well, yeah, like a frog, but...
A saltwater frog. Who
yeah,
can't
a
crush.
saltwater frog.
So, are we haven't got to the theories section yet, so we can't. Actually, there is not one, so we can't say it's a frog just yet.
Okay.
Here's our best theory: the Nuckelavee was just a giant frog.
Speaking of which, I had a dream that this really huge toad was, like, swimming towards my dad. Just FYI.
We're kind of getting off topic.
Wow.
I know, I just wanted to tell
Wow.
you guys, just, like, on a personal level.
Off the record.
I appreciate that story.
It was really scary. Like, I thought the toad was gonna get my
Was
dad.
it a toad or a frog?
It was a toad, but like it was
And
in
it
the
would give
water.
A giant wart.
No, it was like a toad, but it was in the water, so I guess that would make it a frog, but it was absolutely a toad, and it was huge, and it was swimming towards him because he was like on the side of the bank.
I think if I was going to encounter a large creature, a large toad would be.
I don't know that.
No, because it could like hop on you, and freaking take you down.
Okay.
So how big of a toad are we talking? Since,
Well, like,
since
at
we're on the
least-
subject.
At least the size of a grown human's head.
Okay, that's
So
not
it's
bad.
not that big.
I think I'm pretty.
That's huge.
Like there, cane toads are that big.
I know, but
The
this one was
biggest thing
like.
I would be concerned
I was
about.
like expecting like a man-sized toad.
That'd
Well,
be
no, I was
ridiculous.
imagining like a car-sized toad.
That'd
But
be
now
ridiculous.
that she's the only thing I would be concerned about with this toad that she described
Yeah.
is when it jumps into your arms, it pees on you.
No toad is ever going to be jumping into my arms. We're not going to have that magical moment.
Well, if it was big and it was jumping at you, you'd have no choice but to catch it. And I'm
do
saying
a
the first thing,
karate chop.
I think you would have some other choices.
the first thing they
I see where you're
do
going.
is pee on you.
No, you've got a karate chop. You've got a roundhouse kick.
You got a
But they
karate
still
chop.
pee
You got
on
a
you.
Judy chop. You got a kung fu kicking.
I don't think toads just pee like that, though.
I think they do.
All
So
right.
just
Well.
like anytime they jump, they pee.
All right. I'm sorry to be that guy, but we're going to have to get back on track.
Okay.
As much as I love talking about toad pee, I didn't really write anything in the script about it. So
Maybe next time.
back to the Nuckelavee. Nuckelavee? However you pronounce it. Miss Nuckelavee.
Ooh, side note, maybe I should start a podcast on my dreams because I have a lot of
Oh,
dreams.
yeah, that'd be a good one.
I started a YouTube channel.
I could do
Yeah.
that, but I would never remember them.
Yeah,
I
me
have
neither.
like
She has the
craziest
weirdest dreams. They're so odd.
Like a toad swimming after my dad.
But-
And we're all terrified about it.
But if you make a podcast about that, I have to be on there to defend myself.
Oh,
She has a lot of awful dreams about me specifically.
It's true.
Like, I'm extremely rude in those dreams. But
Like he tried to date another woman. He tried to start a polygamous relationship without my permission.
A polygamist?
Yeah.
Was I in there?
No, it was
No.
it was
Am I ever
me
in
and
your
another
dreams?
girl.
I don't think you've ever debuted in one of my dreams.
I hope they got that audio.
Yeah, I'm sure it will.
Kind of picture what I did.
It does get all the audios from when you slightly bump the table.
Oh,
so-
does it?
Yeah.
Damn it, Gary, now you gotta log back in.
Oh, no, I don't.
All right, podcast over.
It's not even turning back on.
Have you tried pressing the power button? Because it's probably in sleep mode.
I did. That's the first thing I did.
Damn it, Gary.
Darren's like, this is the most worst idea ever.
Yeah, we're not having any other guests. God, I can only imagine what's going to be
I've
like
got
Brent.
it. Oh, gosh.
So, a couple of different other things about the Nuckelavee. It's unknown what form the Nuckelavee takes when it returns to water. People think that it might take like a different form in the water, like maybe of a fish. I mean, it does have fins on its horse legs, so maybe it just stays in its horse form. I wouldn't imagine that would be very hydrodynamic, but
It'd be a seahorse.
Hey. Yeah, you're right.
okay, moving on. So the breath of the Nuckelavee was said to wilt crops and sicken livestock. So it's kind of got like a toxic breath, kind of like what we have now with the garlic fries we just ate. Most other mythological creatures like this have some sort of dual nature where they can be kind to humans or they can be evil. Take dragons, for example, or fairies. But the Nuckelavee is pure evil, has no dual nature, and it hates humans more than anything else. Would you like to read the little fun fact?
Orcadians would oftentimes burn seaweed drifts that washed up on the shore to sell the mineral salt that came out of the ash. This was considered a great offense to the Nuck, and the smell of the smoke emitted during the process was believed to enrage the demon, resulting in a wild rampage of plague, the deaths of cattle, and the destruction of crops. The practice was abandoned due to fear of the Nuckelavee.
The Nuck was believed to be the cause of an infectious disease called Glanders. According to the Center for Disease Control website, Glanders is an infectious disease that is caused by the bacterium Burkholderia malae. Infection primarily occurs by the ingestion of contaminated feed or water. While people can get the disease, Glanders is primarily a disease affecting horses, donkeys, and mules. It can be naturally contracted by other mammals such as goats, dogs, and cats. Symptoms of Glanders commonly include fever with chills and sweating, muscle aches, chest pain, muscle tightness, headache, nasal discharge, light sensitivity, sometimes with excessive tearing of the eyes. Death can occur within months, with survivors becoming carriers of the disease.
You know, I was thinking,
Yeah.
what we could do,
Oh, yeah?
just have her reread that, but you could play like the pharmaceutical commercials, play the soft music in the background, and
Side effects may
Yeah.
happen.
I was like, this sounds exactly like one of those.
Ask your doctor if Glanders
Yeah.
is right for you. So, one thing interesting I found about the Nuckelavee being blamed as a cause of Glanders is that one way of contracting Glanders is through contaminated water. The Nuckelavee is a water beast or water demon of sorts, so it does have some sort of a connection. The creature was also kind of the opposite, also blamed for droughts.
Are you doing any reading in this at all, or is it
Yeah.
just me and Susan show?
I'm reading.
Oh.
It's just us.
I'm providing.
He's just playing manager.
I'm providing insight.
We're the talent.
Well, I decided I'd get the most out of my guess by having her read a lot.
You are the boss.
I did all the editing so I can make it sound terrible.
Yeah.
Keep that in
Impossible.
mind.
I do that myself. Thank you. According to Orcadian myth, there was only one thing known to control, or at least confine the Nuckelavee, and that was a good spirit known as the Mither o' the Sea.
Mither of the Sea. It's like mother.
Mither of... Oh, yeah. Hey.
But it's like Irish
Mither of
or
the Sea.
Scottish-fied.
So you have to say it in Scottish.
Mither of the Sea.
Mither.
That's
What
it.
was that?
I don't know which one was worse, mine or his.
Yeah, I know that thing. According to OrkneyJar.com, the Mither is a personification of the forces that affect everyday life. The myth of the Mither of the Sea is possibly one of the oldest surviving strands of Orcadian folklore. In this case, the sea Mither represents the benign force of the summer sea, Mither being the Orcadian pronunciation of mother. The sea Mither was said to grant life to every living thing, bringing warmth to the ocean and calming the storms that were the sorrow of many an Orkney family. She had a very powerful and hostile rival in Terran, the spirit of winter. Terran's screaming voice was heard in the fury of the winter gales, and his anger seen in the mountainous waves that crashed against the coastline. Each spring, around the vernal equinox, the sea Mither was thought to return to Orkney to take up her summer residence in the sea. Her return always prompted the beginning of the Vor Tulai, the spring struggle, a fierce battle against Terran that lasted for weeks and manifested itself in devastating storms that churned the sea into a boiling froth. However, the result of the conflict was always a foregone conclusion. The sea Mither had returned, refreshed and strong, and would always triumph over her adversary. Once overcome, Terran was bound firmly at the bottom of the sea, and thus began the sea Mither's beneficent reign. She would immediately set to work restoring the damage caused by Terran. She stilling his violent storms and calming the raging sea. Warmth and life returned to the water, interrupted only by the occasional squall caused by Terran as he struggled to break his magical bonds. But as winter approached and the equinox grew near, the sea Mither, exhausted by her labors over the summer, was forced to confront Terran again. Breaking...
You started off so strong.
I know I did. That's all I was like, that's
Breaking
too strong.
free.
Too much. Too much.
We're breaking through a storm.
Breaking free of his shackles, another battle, the Gore Valai, or Autumn Tumult, ensued. But this time, Terran would emerge victorious, gripping the islands once more in a terrible embrace. His foe banished, Terran would once again reign supreme, and for a while, every living creature had to submit to his tyrannous rule. During these dreadful days of winter, the sea Mither was said to be able to hear the cries of every drowning man, consoling herself in the knowledge that, when spring arrived, she would return, refreshed and invincible, and prevail again.
All right, guys. So now that you know more about the sea Mither and her one of being the only thing that can control the Nuckelavee, any thoughts on her specifically? On her being more of a benevolent spirit?
Well, the Nuck definitely sounds like a mama's boy.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, like he's this crazy person thing, but then like his evil mother is the only one that can soothe him.
His evil mother?
Well, she seemed a little intense too.
She's intense, but she's a benevolent spirit.
Oh yeah. So like he's this evil, crazy person, but the only person he cares for is his mother.
Well, I don't
his
really.
sweet, kind mother.
I don't really think he has any choice in the matter.
I am honestly confused at this. This is the only one that has confused the crowd.
Okay,
like
so-
at the beginning, I could imagine, I could picture the story, but now, like, I have no.
Let me
idea what's
provide
There's
some.
like a lot happening.
Let me provide some context for you. So the Orkney Islands is an archipelago.
Yeah, we got that. I
Yeah.
said it like 5 times.
It's an archipelago. So, and where they lived, they're surrounded by.
Hang on. Let's go back. We keep saying archipelago, but I don't know what that means. Is that
It's
just old?
it's a collection of islands.
Oh. So like Hawaii?
Yes, Hawaii is an archipelago.
Okay.
So
Australia is an archipelago?
no,
No, Australia is just one island. One really big island.
Oh, so when it's a multiple, it's
like
one
Hawaii.
place.
remember
But
when I
it's
said a
multiple
collection of islands?
So like Hawaii, but Australia is just one big island. It's also a continent.
And a country.
Oh yes.
Crikey. Oh, shout out to our Australian listeners, by the way. Thanks to all 2 of you.
Yeah. It's
Apparently, you're a collection of islands. Go you.
No. I was thinking an island.
Hey, if you're going to speak towards the microphone.
It don't matter.
It does matter.
They'll know that I'm turning away from the microphone.
You're so embarrassed.
Gary is turning away from the microphone. Okay, so
He rolls his eyes.
Seductively. All right, let me provide some context. So the sea is very important to the Orkney people, being surrounded by it, and in a sense they rely on it for food and for resources such as the kelp that they would burn to get the mineral salt. So the sea is very important to them. So they had 2 big forces of nature of the sea. There was the one in the springtime where the seas were calm, and that was the Mother of the Sea. She was the spirit that overcame the raging sea and stilled the waters. Right?
Okay.
So that was their explanation for still waters. And as for the stormy waters, that they assigned a spirit responsible for that as well, named Terran. And so they're in this constant cycle of one arises, it gets to rule
So
over the seas.
essentially, they just gave an exaggerated description of season change.
Yes, exactly. It's
Okay.
it's changing of seasons in the seas. And to explain stuff they didn't really understand, they assigned supernatural elements to it.
Kind of like our Jack Frost.
Yes, exactly. So both the Mother of the Sea and the Terran were both forces of nature.
Gotcha.
And since
I'm on board now.
the Nuckelavee is part of the sea, the Mother has some power over him. Right?
Gotcha.
Right? Are we all caught up?
I'm on board.
All right,
It makes
so
sense now.
Orkney Island, or the Orkney Islands, the Orkney Archipelago, if you will. It's right in between Scotland and Norway, or the whole Norse area. So it's kind of got a mishmash of folklore from both Scottish, Irish, English, and Norse mythology. So let's discuss that a little bit more. First, we're going to talk about the Norse influences. So this first one is a Norse spirit called the Nuck, or the Nix.
According to mythicalcreaturesguide.com, Nuck are shape-shifting water spirits who usually appear in human form. These spirits have appeared in the myths and legends of all Germanic peoples in Europe, although perhaps most known in Norwegian and Scandinavian folklore. In recent times, such creatures have usually been depicted as human in shape, albeit in many cases shape-shifting. The Scandinavian Nuck were male water spirits who played enchanted songs on the violin, luring women and children to drown in lakes and streams. However, not all of these spirits were necessarily malevolent. In fact, many stories exist that indicate at the very least that Nucken were entirely harmless to their audience and attracted not only women and children, but men as well with their sweet songs. It is difficult to describe the actual appearance of the Nuck, as one of its central attributes was thought to be shapeshifting. Perhaps he did not have any true shape. He could show himself as a man playing the violin in brooks and waterfalls, but could also appear to be treasure or various floating objects, or as an animal, most commonly in the form of a brook horse. The modern Scandinavian names are derived from an Old Norse nyker, meaning river horse. Thus, likely the brook horse preceded the personification of the Nix as the man in the rapids. Fosgrim and derivatives were almost always portrayed as especially beautiful young men, whose clothing, or lack thereof, varied widely from story to story.
So this example I was talking about earlier, how they have a dual nature. They will either lure people in and drown them, or in some cases they'll even fall in love with humans, and maybe they'll just be nice and just play for their audience. So if this sounds familiar, because it sort of sounds like sirens, to where they play a sweet song and lure them into their deaths, but this is like a male version of a siren, but he plays music. I don't know where they got the instruments, but apparently they play music.
I'm kind of all about it. I know my boyfriend's right here, but if a half-naked, beautiful man is sitting on some, rocks in this babbling brook playing a beautiful violin, I'm gonna plop myself down and have a grand old time. No, nobody else.
You're gonna plop yourself down.
Yeah, just on a little rock across the stream. I'm not gonna get close because that would be weird. Strangers, but
Stranger danger.
yeah, stranger danger. But anybody else, free concert with beautiful scenery and beautiful half naked people to look at.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
So
what you're saying is you want me to take my clothes off and play music for you guys.
Yes. We've got an electric bass guitar. Will that suffice?
yeah, it's right over there in the corner.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
Nice.
I know how to play it totally.
Dun, 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 dun,
Don't
dun.
ask me to demonstrate, but just take my word for it.
Oh, I was going to say the listeners would probably like that. Go ahead and go grab it.
It sort of briefly got mentioned in the Scandinavian folklore in the Nuck. How it was called a brook horse. Can I help you?
I wanted to knock really bad.
I'm so glad we're not on the Nuck anymore.
It almost feels like you have to. Okay.
So, in Celtic mythology, there's also a water horse. The Scottish name for it is the Kelpie, and it's sort of a shape-shifting water spirit.
Celtic or Celtic?
It's Celtic. Celtic is the basketball team. Celtic is... You said Celtic earlier.
Yeah, because I thought that's what it was.
Mm-mm.
I thought it made the sound this time.
It don't matter. I sometimes want to say Celtic too.
It doesn't matter.
It does not matter.
It do not matter.
It do not.
Okay, so this is an excerpt from mythology.net. The moors were dark. A haze rising from the nearby river gave the impression that smoke was rising from some hellish gape in the earth. The man walking the lonely road wished he had some faster way to travel. As if the folk of the land were listening, a pale, saddled horse appeared near the water. The man approached it, reaching tentatively. The horse's nicker did not indicate fear, but rather sounded like an invitation. Using the saddle horn to pull himself up, the man could not believe his luck. Suddenly, the horse burst into a run, heading straight for the river. The terrified man tried to dislodge himself from the horse, but some supernatural force kept him in place. The water did not seem to slow the horse. In fact, its touch seemed to give it speed. The man realized this was no horse at all, but a kelpie. Just at the moment, his head went below the surface, never to return. So, like the Knock... Thank you. So like the Knock, kelpies also have sort of a dual nature, although you don't get it from that story. Some cases they drown people, like in this instance, or in other cases they save people from drowning.
So maybe it's kind of like a dog, like they can sense if someone's good or bad, and they like only drown the bad people.
That's an interesting observation.
Yeah.
I like it.
It's more than I got.
I was about to say. I think that one sentence is more than you've ever contributed.
Yeah, it is. It is on this one.
It is an interesting thought, though. Doing the research for this and all these different water horses from both Scandinavian and Celtic myths, it's like, what's the connection between water and horses? You really don't. You really think of the two as being mutually exclusive. You don't really think of them together.
Right. Another water horse comes from the Greek mythology, and it was known as the hippocampus. Hippocampus. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, hippocampus.
Yeah, it's just like hippo.
Campus.
And
Yeah,
campus.
it's like a hippo in college.
Another water horse comes from Greek mythology, and it was known as the hippocampus.
Big hippo on campus.
The
Sorry, I had to
hippocampus.
say it.
That was my name in college.
The name comes from the Greek hippos and
Hippos.
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 I like the Greek hippos.
They're so much better than the African hippos. They're so much
That's my
nicer.
favorite sports team. Come on, Greek hippos.
Go Greek hippos.
As a psych major, I feel like that's very appropriate.
Yeah.
You know? Greek hippos. Okay.
Sorry.
Wait, what does that do with your psych major?
Because, like, the hippocampus. So, like, the Greek hippos. And, yeah.
All right, you're not talking right now. Gary's talking. Gary, would you like to talk, please?
so
for the love
lost.
of God, don't. Yeah, me too.
Well, like, the hippocampus, it's part of your brain. And then I was a psychology
Gary,
major.
don't ask about
so,
it.
So,
Don't
Greek
worry.
hippos should be, like, my mascot.
Oh, okay.
Any
Like,
listeners out there,
psychology,
please
yeah.
send me,
Why can't your mascot just be a disembodied brain?
any listeners out there who would like to send me support, go ahead.
Another water horse comes from the Greek mythology, and it was known as the hippocampus.
Can you read it again and not say the Greek mythology?
Sorry.
I just want to say I'm embarrassed for my tangent because it was on a whole different level. And now I'm
Like
even more
earlier?
embarrassed.
I was about to say, now
Oh
you're
my
drawing attention
gosh.
back to-
Oh, yeah, I'm like, wait, no, it's not because you're smarter than I am.
I know.
Yeah.
All right, guys.
Okay.
We're on
Sorry.
page 9 out of 12, and
Sorry.
we are currently an hour and 6 minutes in.
Oh, sorry.
And this is going to be cut down to like a 40-minute episode.
Another water horse comes from Greek mythology, and it was known as the hippocampus. The name comes from the Greek hippos, horse, and campos, sea monster. The hippocampus is also a part of the brain which was named after the creature due to its appearance resembling a seahorse, the actual animal.
That's so cute.
I know.
Okay.
If it was,
Okay,
if
got
only
the
it was a
giggles.
size, it's.
No more garlic fries for you.
Apparently they make me squirrely.
A Greek hippocampus, however, was depicted as a hybrid between a horse and a fish. It had the head and front torso of a horse, but the back half was a long tail of a fish. Basically, a horse mermaid. In some depictions, it even had wings. The hippocampi were known as servants of Poseidon and often drew Poseidon's chariot in some depictions. Everyone knows that Poseidon was the god of the sea, but a lesser known fact was that he was the god of earthquakes and of a certain animal. Poseidon attempted to create the most beautiful animal in the world in order to impress his sister, Demeter, whom he fell in love with. It's disgusting.
That's Greek mythology for you.
Yeah. I was hoping that's not where it was going. Some accounts say Poseidon created many animals in this attempt, but by the time he created the first horse, he had lost interest in Demeter. It was a pleasure to meet her.
Get out. Oh my god.
So here is our connection between horses and the element of water, Poseidon.
That's our connection between horses and water, but why would a Greek god be in Great Britain?
Pythias of Messala was a skilled Greek navigator, astronomer, and mariner who undertook a great voyage. A voyage that would lead him to the British Isles. It is believed that he explored most of Britannia, both by land and by sea, around 325 BC. His original descriptions of the land has not survived, but accounts of the voyage have survived by writers such as Timaeus,
You're on your own.
Eratosthenes, Pliny the Elder, Diodorus Siculus, Strabo, and Polybius.
Polybius?
Yeah, Polybius. This excerpt from ancient.eu describes Diodorus Siculus' writings on the voyage. After observing the inhabitants of Cornwall and southwestern Britain, Pythias likely proceeded north along the coast of Wales. It is possible he landed on the Isle of Man before sailing up the west coast of Scotland and passing between the outer and inner Hebrides. According to various sources, he made a number of landfalls. In fact, Strabo quotes Pythias as saying he traversed the whole of Britannic accessible by foot, but in characteristic fashion adds the aside that such a feat is patently observed. Pythias also took a number of latitudinal readings with his gnomon. This was a device like a modern-day stadia rod that was designed to take measurements. What the hell is this?
Please just read it. We're providing some context on why.
I know, but
Poseidon
like
would be in Great
these are
Britain.
insane words.
Hey,
Well,
it's Greek mythology.
I was about to say, if we're discussing Greek mythology, we're going to have to pronounce Greek
Okay.
words.
Well, can you just keep your judgy eyes down over there? Because that's what's really getting
Oh
to
no,
me.
can you pronounce any of the words correctly?
No! Pythias also took a number of latitudinal readings with his gnomon. This was a device like a modern-day stadia rod that was designed to take measurements of the sun's shadow from different latitudes and thereby calculate one's position. Pliny mentioned that to the north of the island of Great Britain lie the Orcades Islands, which most scholars have assumed are today's Orkney Islands, though the precise number given by Pliny does not accord with the actual number. From there, some scholars believe Pythias made the most daring leg of his voyage by leaving Britain behind and venturing into the North Sea.
Okay, so thank you for reading that.
Yes, you're welcome.
So basically, Pythias was this Greek explorer who sailed over to Great Britain and even further beyond. Some scholars don't believe he did any of that, but from my research, it looks like a lot of his accounts match up with at least the location of where modern-day Britain and the Orkney Islands are today. So after doing this research and attempting to track down the origin of water horses, my theory is that Pythias influenced the culture of the Celtic people by telling them of Poseidon, the god of sea and horses, which combined their myths of water spirits. So to put it all together, Poseidon led to the hippocampus, which led to the Kelpie, which led to the Nuckelavee. the devil of the sea. Of course, there are many other factors that led to the shaping of these myths, but I believe it's possible that it can be simplified down to that. This is just all my speculation because Scandinavia had their own version of water horses. I just found it a bit odd that horses were associated with water in countries other than Greece. There is one more creature that I believe influenced Nuckelavee, a creature that shares the Nuck's demonic tendencies and nightmarish appearance, the Dullahan.
The Dullahan, or Dark Man, is a demonic fairy from Irish folklore. A Dullahan is a headless rider on a black horse who carries its grinning head under its arm. Ah, the Headless Horseman. The Headless Horseman of the Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving was inspired by the legend of the Dullahan. The Dullahan carries a whip made out of a human spine and pulls a demonic wagon behind it. When the Dullahan stops riding, that is where a person is due to die.
See, somebody would pick up that phone, Susan, because you called it.
I did.
You did?
That's hilarious.
I know.
I did not.
I didn't make that up, though. I got it from somewhere. It's all right. I steal jokes, and I pass them off as my own. But it is hilarious,
I'm
nonetheless.
proud of you, because that was good.
The Dullahan, can we just say that the Dullahan is pretty metal? It has a whip made of a human spine.
Yeah. That's probably what's happening to that child out there. I don't know if you guys can hear that, but...
Yes, I can. I hate the neighborhood kids. Oh, no, wait. You have to edit that out or else it's like one of them shows up.
Oh, yeah.
I heard what you said in your podcast, and we don't very much appreciate it.
I am 100% sure that nobody in this neighborhood listens to my podcast.
I know.
Our
Our
podcast.
podcast.
My.
I noticed on your little mini episode, it was all my, and I'm like, well, fine.
Well, Gary, I
Just
do.
because it was originally.
I do all the legwork.
You do. You do.
All right.
I'm just the personality.
So let's wrap this up. Any final thoughts on the Legend of Nuckelavee or any of the myths associated with it?
No.
No?
This is just one of them that I needed you guys to clarify because I could not get on the bandwagon.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's hard to say. It's like I don't dislike the subject.
Right.
I'm not understanding it.
Well, it's just...
I think it's the coolest thing
Right.
we've talked about.
As far as appearance, it is really ghoulish looking. And as far as the concept, it's a lot more vague than a lot of other ones that we've done or will
that
do.
could be it, yeah.
Like something like Bigfoot. Grounded, you know exactly what it is. It doesn't necessarily have to represent anything. It could just be something. Whereas the Nuckelavee itself, it's less of a creature and more just of folklore that defines the Orkney Islands. But obviously, the residents of the Orkney Islands did fear something. The Nuckelavee is a product of many cultures, I believe. It's got Norse influences and Celtic influences, and if my speculation is any sort of correct, even has Greek influences. In my research, I found that the sources compared the Nuckelavee with water horses and Norse water spirits, but does not compare it to the Dullahan, which I think the Nuck resembles more than anything else. The Nuckelavee seems to be a hybrid between a water horse and a Dullahan, to me.
The Nuckelavee is a grotesque creature whose animosity towards humans is legendary. This demon was feared so greatly, the Orcadians dared not to even speak its name for fear of summoning it. Hopefully we have not done so. The myths of the Norse, Celts, and maybe even the Greeks blended together on the Orkney Islands and created this frightening folklore.
Hey, that's the name of the podcast.
Thank you so much for listening to Snipe Hunt. Your listening has been noted and will be reported with proper authorities. Please follow us on social media. If you have a question, comment, or a suggestion for a future episode, you can email us at snipehuntpodcast@gmail.com.
Logo design is by Ethan Rothfuss. All music heard, with the exception of the intro and outro, is by Kevin McLeod at Incompetech.com and Miu at DarkPiano.com. Possible tracks played include Crypto, Day of Chaos, Evening of Chaos, and Static Motion. Once again, thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next hunt.